Hey guys, here is the prep work for today's class on Intro to Color Theory. We're going to start with basic mixing of colors using the three primary colors. So you've probably heard that the three primary colors are red, yellow, and blue, but to be more specific, it's going to be a color that's called cyan, magenta, and a yellow. What that sort of translates to in terms of your watercolors are a phthalo blue, a lemon yellow, and a crimson. Although there are different names for this and different colors that will work in this format, and I'll try to explain how you can choose those colors later on. So we are using sea white watercolors today because those are what we're going to be using in class, and we're going to be using Prussian blue in class rather than phthalo blue. I've just forgotten to bring my Prussian blue home. But I'm going to start with the primary colors. So phthalo blue is a cool blue. It is closer to, like if you can imagine, a turquoisey blue than other blues like ultramarine. And it's going to come right here as our primary blue on our color spectrum. Our next color is crimson. So this is kind of almost like pinkish red. It's more kind of purpley, magenta-y in tone than what you would consider like a cadmium red. So I'm going to put this here, crimson. And then finally we've got our lemon yellow, which I'm going to place here. So we've got our three primaries. And while I'm at it, I'm going to put the colors in the second color wheel, which we'll move to in a second, down as well, just so I don't have to keep muddying up my brush. What you'll notice is that as all of these colors mix together, they turn into either brown or gray, and we'll go over why that is in a bit as well. So just putting these colors down. Okay, so colors side to side of primary colors or side to side to other colors on the color wheel are considered harmonious colors. That's because they blend together really well. So now I'm going to make a blue purple by adding just a little bit of the crimson to the phthalo blue. And you can see it creates kind of a darker blue here. I'm now going to create more of a reddish purple by adding in a little bit more of the crimson. So a little bit more here. And I'm going to place this right here on the color wheel. And now we've got harmonious colors. So any of the colors side to side here are going to mix together very well. Next, just going to clean off the space on my palette. We're going to start mixing together the crimson and the lemon yellow. So let me just get a bit of crimson and a tiny bit of yellow. This is going to create more of a warm red. So let me just get this in. Reddish orange. And then if I add more of the lemon yellow here, I'm going to get an even lighter kind of orangey color. And finally, I'm going to move into the greens. So greens are very quick to make because just the tiniest bit of blue with any yellow is going to turn it into a green. So I'm just going to add the tiniest bit of blue to make a yellowish green. And then I'm going to add in much more blue to make more of a turquoise blue-green. Now to use your color wheel, now you know that any of these colors that follow the peace sign, they're going to mix together. Colors side by side to one another are going to mix together. But if you mix together colors that are directly opposite each other, such as yellow and purple, so these two purples, red and green, these two greens, or blue and orange, they're going to create brown. Okay, so moving on to our next color wheel. Okay, so now let's compare our first color wheel with our second. For this color wheel, we've used straight out of the bottle colors for each of these instead of mixing, with the exception of purple, because the sea white set didn't come with a purple. So we're just going to instead use the out of the bottle greens, but you might find a Winsor violet or a dioxazine violet that can fill that place on the scale. What you'll notice is that these colors are a little bit more vibrant than what we have on our original mixing color wheel. And that's in part just because of the difficulties keeping your brush and your palette clean when mixing colors, and also because of pigmentation. So if you remember what we were saying about harmonious colors, colors side by side blend best together. Artist paints are made out of pigments, ideally a single pigment. So basically what you get when you get an ultramarine blue is a pigment that's even closer to crimson on the color wheel than phthalo blue. So it's going to create even a more vibrant purple than if we mix these two together. So just to illustrate that point, see this purple versus this purple here. The difference is probably going to be a little bit easier to see in class, but you'll notice that the purple made with ultramarine blue is more vibrant. Now, the opposite also goes into effect. So even though phthalo blue mixed with crimson can create a nice purple color, let's say we mix the ultramarine blue with the color we've placed right next to lemon yellow on the color wheel, which is yellow ochre. If you're doing this at home, you can substitute a cadmium yellow for this, or a warm yellow. You'll probably have that on your palette. We just don't have that here because it's toxic. But what you'll get when you mix together those two colors is gray, more or less. It's a very grayish, it's not quite a green. Let's try the ultramarine and the vermilion together. So we have, with those two mixed together, a purple. It's not quite as vibrant as this purple here because it's just a little bit further on the color wheel. So you may find that the same applies with, say, a cadmium red. So basically, the closer colors are side by side to one another on the color wheel, the better they'll mix. The further apart they are, up until, they're complementary, the more dull they're going to mix together. And these colors all will mix with one another fairly well. So you could use this as a color wheel. But in this is also the explanation why you shouldn't start out with too many colors when you're starting watercolors, because the more pigments you add to the mix, the duller your colors become. So you want to be using as much as you can single pigment colors, because that means you know that a brand hasn't made a color by mixing together two pigments that might react badly with, say, a third if you bring it in from a different brand. Basically, you want to be using these natural pigments that are closest together to one another on the wheel to get the most vibrant colors. And then in class, we'll go over some creative ways of using complementary colors to create dynamic compositions. Okay, so now just a little bit about color theory terminology and how to mix colors to make them actually accurate. So I'm covering off this section here because I first want to explain why you should avoid using black and white as a beginner in watercolors, but why there is a use for both of them in the end. Now, both of these colors are what I'd consider pastel shades. However, the first is made by combining red with black. The second is by combining red with white. Now, the reason that both black and white create pastel shades when added to watercolors is that their use is not necessarily to darken or lighten your watercolor. White watercolor makes your paint a little bit more opaque. It'll make it absorb the light more and make more of a pastel shade. It's not going to make your paint any lighter. Black might make your paint darker, but it's not going to be the darkest tone on your palette. Instead, it's going to make your paints duller, which also create this pastel effect when diluted. So you don't make your watercolors lighter or darker by adding black and white. You make them lighter by adding water or leaving clear paper, and you make them darker by adding a tone which is darker. Tone refers to the lightness and darkness. If I were to take a black and white picture and just measure how light and dark something was. So I'll see if I can edit this in, but I'm just going to take some black. Phthalo blue is probably going to be the darkest tone on your palette, but again, I don't have any of that today. I'm going to take a blue. Now I'm going to mix a little bit of brown with that blue, so that's going to make a dark tone. And it's both the concentration of the pigment and the pigment itself that makes the watercolor darker. So if you're not putting in a concentration of black, for instance, that's particularly heavily pigmented like this, that's not going to end up actually being darker. And same as if I mix it with a color. It's not going to make it any darker, it's just going to make it duller. You'll notice that the black here isn't necessarily the darkest tone among the three, and in fact the blue isn't very different from the black at all, and that's because in terms of tone, the black and the blue watercolors are very similar. The relative darkness of the same is only affected by the addition of water, so even though that's black, since I've added water, it's lighter than the rest of the tones here. So in watercolor, unless you deliberately want to dull down your colors, there's not really a reason to be using the black. Or, I mean, you can use it if it's the very darkest tone on your palette, as sometimes things that are really dark also are more dull because you can see less color, but it's not necessarily the best choice to use. Now, in reference to duller, that refers to something called chroma. When we refer to a color with high chroma, it means high purity. So a color with high chroma would have very little black in it. A color with low chroma would have much more black in it. So this is red mixed with an equal amount of black. Low chroma colors can be useful because our eye is going to be drawn to the colors with the highest chroma. Our eye is drawn to light, and in light, colors have higher chromatic values usually because there's less room for shade. So you can use blacks and whites in watercolors, but you do need to be careful because the white will bring the chroma down because you're adding an adulterant to your watercolors. It's no longer picking up the transparent white of the paper. You're adding pigment into that paint in a way that's absorbing light. But it can be useful if you want like a nice fresh salmon tone. Similarly, maybe you'd add black if there's a part of your painting you don't want the focus to be on because you've added higher chroma later. But if you've just started watercolors, it's unlikely that either of those situations is really going to happen. So I would just avoid using light and dark altogether. Terminology, hue. Hue simply refers to the color of something. It's really easy to mix up hue and the actual color of something. So for instance, if you look at this tomato, you probably think this is a red tomato. That red color is its local value. So that is the color of the tomato if it had absolutely no light kind of coming in from the sides or reflecting off of it. But if I put it in here, this is no longer a red tomato. I'll again edit in what this is, but this is because a reflected value, the glass, is altering the actual color of the tomato, as is the tone. It's darker, and so that's also going to change what the actual hue is. So the thing to remember here is just that you're almost certainly going to get it wrong. We almost always get colors wrong because the way we're designed is to see colors relative to their environments. It's not to accurately see the colors as they are, but because colors are so dependent on their environments, it means that when we're trying to paint them, it can be really easy to get it wrong. So a couple ways to get your colors right, I'll go over in class, like taking a photo on your phone and zooming in. And what else can you do? You can also cut out a little hole in a piece of paper to look at the color with, which can give you a more exact picture of what that color is. Or you can use, which I'll go over, and this is why I think glazing techniques are so useful, a glazing technique, which is where you pair a cool tone, like say a blue, as an underlayer because blue, we're adding more pigment to the page. Blue is a darker pigment that's going to absorb the light more as our base layer, and then add the actual hue, so the actual colors that we see on top of that. And that can be a useful way to separate these two complicated factors that influence one another, tone and hue. I've taken a screenshot of the tomato under normal light and within the glass. As you'll see, the colors up here, these are all swatches from the tomato, are more red. The colors here are more purple. That's because the reflected light is predominating in this one. But you'll also probably realize that these tones, and especially that one, this one over here, are not really what you'd call pure red. So again, the color even under most normal light is different. Just to illustrate the point of how the background color can influence how you see color as well and how it's perceived, take a look at this box here. So these are the same three colors up here, or the same set of colors. They're not the same three, there are four of them. This is with a red background. Under a red background, they look just dark and kind of cooler as well. So now I'm just going to take the little thing. When I put them on a dull yellow background, they look more purple. Let's put it on a gray background. Now they look more vibrant. If I put them on a blue background, now they look more red. But basically the way I'm perceiving this color is changing constantly based on both what's surrounding it and also the actual influences bouncing off of the light.